In the United States, you can walk into a motorcycle dealership on a Saturday morning, take a weekend safety course on a 250 cubic centimeter training bike, pass a written test, and by Monday afternoon ride home on a brand new Ducati Panigale V4 making 216 horsepower. One of the most powerful street-legal motorcycles ever built. Nobody will stop you. Nobody will ask if you've ever ridden on a highway. Not a single state in America imposes a horsepower or displacement cap on what an adult first-time rider can buy. Now try that in Germany or France or Italy or any of the 27 countries in the European Union. You can't. You literally cannot do it. Because in Europe, if you are 18 years old and you want to ride a motorcycle, the law says you start with a bike that makes no more than 47 horsepower, and you stay there for at least 2 years before anyone lets you near the big stuff. That 47 horsepower cap isn't a suggestion. It's an entire motorcycle category, and it created some of the best-selling bikes on the continent. Bikes that Americans have either never heard of or can't figure out why they exist. So how did two of the biggest motorcycle markets in the world end up with completely different rules for who gets to ride what? The answer involves European Parliament legislation, a powerful American lobbying group, billions of dollars in motorcycle sales, and a body count that might change your mind about which side got it right. The whole thing traces back to a single piece of European Union legislation. EU Directive 2006/126/EC, also known as the Third Driving License Directive, took full effect on January 19, 2013, and it forced every European Union member state to adopt the same standardized licensing ladder for motorcycles. Not guidelines, not recommendations. Law. The ladder has 4 rungs. At the bottom is category AM, which covers mopeds with a top speed of 45 kilometers per hour. You can get that as young as 16 in most countries. Next up is A1, which allows light motorcycles up to 125 cubic centimeters and 15 horsepower. Still 16 or 17, depending on the country. Then comes the one that changed everything, category A2, available at age 18 in most European Union countries, 19 in the United Kingdom, which kept a nearly identical system after leaving the European Union. The A2 license lets you ride motorcycles making up to 35 kilowatts, which works out to roughly 47 horsepower, with a power-to-weight ratio that cannot exceed 0.2 kilowatts per kilogram. That weight rule is important because it means manufacturers cannot just stuff a 47 horsepower engine into a tiny 130 kilogram frame and call it a beginner bike. The math does not work. A full-power 35 kilowatt bike needs a curb weight of at least 175 kilograms to stay legal. And then there is one more catch, the double power rule. You can take a more powerful motorcycle and restrict it down to 47 horsepower for A2 use, but only if the original unrestricted version makes no more than 70 kilowatts, which is roughly 94 horsepower. So a Yamaha MT-07 making 73 horsepower can be legally restricted for A2 riders. But a Yamaha MT-09 making 117 horsepower cannot. The gap between the original power and the restricted power is too large. Finally, at the top of the ladder sits the full A license. You can reach it at age 20 through what the EU calls progressive access, which means riding on an A2 for at least 2 years and then passing a practical skills test on a larger bike. Or you can skip the ladder entirely and go for direct access at age 24 in most member states, but that means starting from scratch on the bigger test. This is where the detail that stunned me comes in. That practical exam in Europe is not a slow-speed parking lot test like the one most American riders take. The EU Directive mandates at least 25 minutes of on-road assessment, including obstacle avoidance and emergency braking at a minimum of 50 kilometers per hour. For context, most US state skills tests never leave a parking lot. That alone is a completely different standard of readiness. But the A2 license did not just change how Europeans get licensed. It fundamentally changed what motorcycles get built. Because when you tell every manufacturer that millions of 18 to 20-year-old riders across 27 countries can only buy bikes making 47 horsepower or less, those manufacturers are going to build bikes specifically for that ceiling. And they did. An entire product category emerged. The Honda CB500 family is the clearest example. Honda designed a 471 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine, making exactly 47 horsepower, then built 5 different motorcycles around it. The CB500F Naked Roadster, the CBR500R Sport Bike, the CL500 Scrambler, the Rebel 500 Cruiser, and the NX500 Adventure Bike. All of them sit right at the A2 limit with zero restriction needed. The CB500X, now rebranded as the NX500, won Motorcycle News' Best A2 Bike Award 5 years running through 2024. KTM did the same thing with the 390 Duke, a 399 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine making 44 horsepower in a chassis weighing about 165 kilograms. Husqvarna took the same platform and built the Svartpilen 401. Kawasaki brought the Ninja 400 and then the Ninja 500, both parallel twins sitting comfortably under the A2 ceiling. Then there is the Aprilia RS 457. This one is almost funny in how precisely it was engineered. A 457 cubic centimeter twin making 47.6 horsepower at a curb weight of 175 kilograms. That lands right on the A2 power cap and power to weight ratio with almost zero margin. Aprilia did not accidentally end up there. They reverse engineered the entire motorcycle from the A2 regulations. And the biggest surprise might be Triumph. In partnership with Bajaj Auto in India, Triumph launched the Speed 400 and Scrambler 400X in 2024, a 398 cubic centimeter single making 40 horsepower. Within 1 year of launch, Bajaj announced those two bikes had sold over 50,000 units across more than 50 countries. The Scrambler 400X became the best-selling modern classic motorcycle in the United Kingdom in its very first full month on sale. Triumph's total global sales topped 100,000 motorcycles for the first time in the company's 122-year history, and those little 400s were a meaningful contributor to that milestone. But the purpose-built A2 bikes are only half the story. The other half is restricted variants. Yamaha sells the MT-07, its best-selling naked bike in Europe, in a factory 35-kilowatt version alongside the full-power 73-horsepower model. Yamaha has confirmed they have sold over 250,000 MT series motorcycles in Europe, with roughly half of those being MT-07s. Bennett's, the UK insurance company, reports the MT-07 captured 30% of European sales in its class in 2024. It has been the best-selling bike in its category every single year since it launched in 2014. Kawasaki went even further. When they built the Z800, the standard version made 111 horsepower, way too much for the double power rule. So Kawasaki created a separate variant called the Z800D with 94 horsepower, specifically so that it could be legally restricted to A2 compliance. They manufactured a different motorcycle just to fit the regulation. This is not a niche market. The European two-wheeler market was valued at over $17 billion in 2025, with motorcycles making up nearly 80% of that total. Official registration data from the European Motorcycle Industry Association, ACEM, shows over 1.15 million new motorcycle registrations across the 5 largest European markets in 2024 alone. And the first quarter of 2026 was up over 21% year-on-year. Now picture the American system sitting right next to all of that. In the United States, there is no federal motorcycle license. Each of the 50 states issues its own motorcycle endorsement, and the process is, to put it politely, flexible. Most states require a written knowledge test, a vision test, and a practical skills evaluation. But here is the part that surprises most European riders. The majority of US states will waive the practical riding test entirely if you complete a Motorcycle Safety Foundation, known as MSF, Basic Rider Course. That course takes roughly 1 weekend, 5 hours of online learning, and about 10 hours on a small training bike in a parking lot. The Motorcycle Safety Foundation says it has trained more than 10 million riders in its more than 50 years of existence. After that, there is no power restriction, no displacement cap, no mandatory progression. A freshly endorsed rider in Texas or Florida or California can walk straight from their MSF graduation into a dealership and finance a Kawasaki ZX-10R making 200 horsepower. Insurance on a supersport for a young new rider can run anywhere from $250 to over $1,000 a month for full coverage, and some insurers will not even write the policy. But nobody is stopping them from buying the bike. and in New Hampshire, they will not even need insurance at all. As of 2022, only 15 U.S. states had any form of graduated motorcycle licensing, and even those were almost entirely limited to riders under 18 or 21. The restrictions were behavioral, things like no passengers and no nighttime riding. Not a single state imposed a horsepower or displacement cap. If you're wondering how that's even possible, you need to understand 4 things about America. First, driver licensing is a state power, not a federal one. The United States government can incentivize states to adopt certain rules by tying highway funding to compliance, which is how universal seatbelt laws happened. But nobody has pushed for the same approach with motorcycle licensing. There is no equivalent of Mothers Against Drunk Driving pressuring Congress for motorcycle-specific graduated licensing. Second, the American Motorcyclist Association, which represents over 200,000 riders and is the most influential motorcycle lobbying group in the country, actively opposes mandatory rider training for adults. Their official position statement says mandated rider education can increase costs, delay training access, and potentially push more riders to skip licensing altogether. The American Motorcyclist Association has not fought a specific European-style tiered proposal because no such proposal has ever reached a United States legislative floor. But their stance on mandatory training leaves no political room for one. Third, the industry has a financial incentive to keep things the way they are. Harley-Davidson still controls a massive share of America's heavyweight motorcycle market, bikes above 601 cubic centimeters, and the average new Harley sells for around $30,000. A system that forces first-time buyers into 47 horsepower machines would directly cut into those sales. The entire business model of the American motorcycle market is built around selling big, expensive bikes to adult enthusiasts. And fourth, there is a practical geography problem. European cities are dense, commutes are short, and a 47 horsepower motorcycle is genuinely useful for daily transportation. American interstates require sustained cruising speeds of 70 to 80 miles per hour with heavy merging traffic. Even people who support tiered licensing in the United States will admit that a 125 cubic centimeter bike, which is what European A1 riders are limited to, would be dangerously underpowered on an American highway. So what does all of this actually cost? According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 6,335 motorcyclists died on U.S. roads in 2023. That is the highest number ever recorded. The fatality rate for motorcycle riders was 31.39 deaths per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, which NHTSA says is almost 28 times the fatality rate for passenger car occupants. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety reports that motorcycle deaths have increased 26% since 2019, and the data on who is dying is revealing. NHTSA's 2023 fatal crash data shows that 34% of motorcycle riders involved in fatal crashes were riding without a valid motorcycle license. 26% had a blood alcohol content at or above the legal limit. 36% were speeding, compared to 22% of car drivers in fatal crashes. Engine size is part of the picture too. The average displacement of motorcycles in US fatal crashes rose from 769 cubic centimeters in 1990 to 959 cubic centimeters by 2001. By 2023, 33% of fatally injured American motorcycle riders were on bikes with engines over 1,400 cubic centimeters. That number was 9% in 2000 and less than 1% in 1990. Comparative OECD analyses suggest that U.S. motorcycle fatality rates are several times higher than most major European countries on a per-registered motorcycle basis. Some studies put the gap at 4 to 5 times. Now that comparison comes with real caveats. Different countries measure exposure differently. Europe has universal helmet laws, while the US has a patchwork of state-by-state helmet mandates. European insurance is more expensive, which may discourage riskier riding. And the European licensing exam itself is far more rigorous than the US equivalent, independent of the A2 power cap. Even the Federation of European Motorcyclists Associations, which you would think would defend the system, has publicly stated that the A2 licensing tier has never been properly researched for effectiveness. The European Commission's own 2022 evaluation estimated that Directive 2006/126/EC as a whole reduced road fatalities by roughly 7% between 2013 and 2018, but that figure covers the entire directive, including car licensing provisions, not the motorcycle tiers specifically. So the honest answer is that Europe's lower fatality rate is consistent with the tiered system working, but we cannot cleanly separate the contribution of the A2 tier from helmet laws, insurance costs, exam rigor, and infrastructure differences. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. The gap between European and American motorcycle buying habits is closing on its own, without any regulation forcing it. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover motorcycle culture, industry deep dives, and riding content every week. All right, so here's where things get interesting. US sport bike sales rose 11.3% year over year in the first quarter of 2024, and all of that growth came from models above 500 cubic centimeters. The 601 to 900 cubic centimeters adventure bike category climbed 13.1%. Meanwhile, the over 900 cubic centimeters class dropped 16.4%. American riders are voluntarily migrating to middleweights. The Yamaha YZF R7, which uses the same 689 cubic centimeters parallel twin engine as the MT-07, is now one of the top-selling sport motorcycles in America. The Honda Transalp 750 and the Yamaha Tenere 700 are pulling adventure riders away from the 1,200 cubic centimeters behemoths that dominated the segment for decades. These are exactly the kinds of middleweight parallel twins that Europe's A2 system normalized years ago, even though both of those bikes need restrictor kits to actually qualify for A2 over there. The American market is doing in 2026 what the A2 Directive forced Europe to do a decade ago. Riders are figuring out on their own that a 70 horsepower middleweight twin is more fun, more usable, and more forgiving than a 180 horsepower superbike they'll never use at full throttle. The real question is not whether the A2 system works. It is whether America will ever care enough to find out. As of right now, no US state has tried a European-style displacement or horsepower cap for new riders. NHTSA has studied the idea, rated it 2 stars out of 5 for uncertain effectiveness, and left it on the shelf. AMA opposes it. The manufacturers have no incentive to push for it, and 6,335 families buried someone last year. Meanwhile, Yamaha keeps selling MT-07s across Europe. Honda keeps building CB500s in 5 flavors. Aprilia engineers keep hitting the 47 horsepower ceiling with millimeter precision. And every 18-year-old in Berlin or Barcelona or Milan starts on a motorcycle that teaches them something before it tries to kill them. America just hands you the keys and wishes you luck. If you want to see more motorcycle industry deep dives like this one, check out the video on screen right now. I will see you in the next one.